Steff Gardner, welcome to the Single Track Podcast.
Hi.
There is so much that I want to get into on this conversation because we were just talking offline and we spend a fair bit of time talking with athletes and coaches on this podcast, but I think that what folks like you do are equally as interesting, if not more interesting, in terms of contributions to our sport. So, like I said, there's a lot to talk about, but I saw on Instagram that you were just at Mount Marathon last weekend for the 4th of July. Can you talk about that experience?
That was wild. So we have been like the presenting sponsor for the last 2 years. We're on a 3-year contract with them. And each year we've gone up and done like an Airbnb right in town and bring up as many athletes as we can. A lot of athletes will put themselves into the lottery. And then also like if they don't get in through that way, you can do a petition. And so some of them get selected that way. But we had a pretty good crew last year and they all did so well that they got to come back this year. And then we had some extra, or we had our Salomon spots, but like last minute, Bailey Kowalczyk got sick, so she couldn't come up. So I tried to give her bib over to Jamil Curry, and he got COVID. And I was like just reaching out to anyone on our team that could come up and race, but it was like the championships were this weekend, and there's just a lot going on. People like just got off of Wasatch 100. Or no, Western States, sorry. Those two are equal in my brain. But I was like, I even asked Eli Hemming, who you just had on, but he's been running in Salomon for so long and I've been talking to him. So I was like, he's basically on the team. I'm going to invite him. But he was going to the championships. And I invited Eric LaPuma and just like nobody could come up. So I was like, maybe I'll have to race. But we went through the weekend and had just really great like pre-race stuff going on. Max King was there for the 3rd time. And Darren Thomas was supposed to jet up on Sunday, but he texted me either Saturday night and Sunday morning and said that he got COVID also. So I think it's just like running amok again. And our whole team is like sick. So I was like, fine, I'll race it. So I got to jump into the women's race, which was the last race this year. The women went first last year, but it was absolutely insane. Our house was close enough to the finish line that I could hear people cheering. And I thought I had a couple minutes before the first place male would come in, but I heard people cheering. So I like ran down there and it was Max, which was so exciting. And then just men like pouring in after, well, there was a pretty big gap, but just so exciting. The streets are completely lined for blocks up to the mountain. And then the mountain is like lined with people. People are just like handing you bunches of grapes and like squirting you with squirt guns and like, it's hot and it's dusty this year. Last year was like raining and like everything was muddy, and Jamil and I went out and we're on course and you'd like take a step up and slide back. And this year was like dusty, like dry. So it's just really crazy weather, super nuts terrain. People just like going so hard. Like it's just crazy. But yeah, it was all in all really good. Allie Mack stayed at our house too. So it was really fun having like the 2 champions staying at the house with us, and like leading up to the event, they were kind of strategizing like, okay, on the way up, there's 3 different ways you can go up. You can take the routes, the cliffs, or the switchbacks. And the switchbacks are for nerds and kids. And then like you pick between the cliffs and the routes, and it's just like legit like roots hanging down and you're like climbing up them like Tarzan or something. But hearing their strategies over the last few days before the race was cool, because then when I hopped in kind of last minute, I was like, okay, I'm going with the cliffs on the way up and I'm taking the waterfall on the way down. There's just so many things. Like there's not a real course. There's 3 ways up, 2 ways down. And then, yeah, it's a 5K with like almost 3,000 feet of climbing, but it's on a mountain called Mount Marathon. So that's very confusing for a lot of people, but very cool race, like super European feeling mountain race. Really like just, I feel like clicks with Salomon. It's been really fun to be connected with that. Oh, I can't hear you. Shoot.
I was just going to say, we both based in the greater Salt Lake area, and I'm trying to see if there's any comparison whatsoever to any of our mountains here. Like, does Mount Marathon compare to like the west side of Grandeur Peak, for example? Is there anything in our area that like, you can compare it to?
I kept thinking like, this is like Malin's, or this is like the west face of Grandeur. And so, but it would be like if you ran a half mile on the road with adrenaline coursing through your body because you're so excited and people are yelling. So you look down and you're doing like a 6-minute pace and you shouldn't be. But then you get to this like cliff and you have to navigate which way you're going to go because it's just immediately like straight up. And then you come out of like the bushes. So the terrain is a lot different, but it is a lot like that climbing, just like relentless. Like it's a lot. I hate the West Face of Manger so much. It's like, I'm always like, I'm never doing this again. But it was a lot like that. And then if you can imagine just like, if you turned around on the top and just, there was like a field of scree and you just had to go down. I didn't wear gaiters, which is a bad move, but yeah, it is very much like the West Face. So if anyone wants to go up to the race, I'll see you there. And maybe we should train on Grandeur together.
Awesome. Well, we're recording this in July, and I guess you could call this like the high point of the season in our sport. And I'm curious, what does the rest of your summer schedule look like? Are you going to any other events? Is it all Salomon based? I think you mentioned Hard Rock earlier before we hit record. So curious to know what it looks like.
So last year I went to Hard Rock and posted on Salomon Running's Instagram. And I didn't do a fantastic job because there's just like the course is huge. It's hard to get to a lot of the spots. There's not a lot of service. So this year I was hoping to just kind of lay low, hire other people to do things. And I'm just going to go as a human being, like as an individual. But then at the last minute, it sounds like we do need someone to post on social. So I might, since I'm going to be out there anyway, I might give it another go. Now I know the course better and the coffee shops that have Wi-Fi and things like that. So I'll be out there for sure. I might be working and I might not be, but I'll be there. And then after that, I'm actually going to Italy for like 3 weeks for fun. We're doing like a hut thing in the Dolomites and some Via Ferrata stuff. And then I come back and I go to this cool women's summer camp in Pennsylvania with Oiselle. It's like a women's running clothing brand. And that's at the end of August. And then September is super heavy up with the Golden Trail Series. So it goes Wham at Whistler Alpine Meadows, and then Pikes Peak Ascent and Flagstaff Sky Peaks. And Pikes Peak and Flagstaff are both on the Golden Trail National Series and World Series. So a lot of like our international elites will be coming out for those, which will be fun. But I won't be at any of those because I'm getting ready to run the Bear, which is at the end of September also. So
that is about as action-packed a summer as I could describe myself. Very cool. Well, I want to get into a little bit of your background before we have, I think, a wide-ranging conversation about the athlete sponsorship landscape. And I forgot to introduce you. You work at Salomon.
hi.
And your title, I think, is...
that has a logo on it. Should I put that on?
If you want.
Keep going. I'm going to logo up.
Logo up, because this is going on YouTube as well. So is it fair to say you're the athlete manager or community manager? What title do you like to go by?
Well, my title is marketing manager for trail running, or trail running marketing manager for North America. But that is newish as of like 5 months. Before that, I was a sports marketing manager. Before that, I was the community marketing manager. Before that, I was a tech rep. So ever since I became like a community marketing manager, I've been working with athletes. And ambassadors, like I managed our ambassador program for a while. Okay. But the sports marketing role and trail marketing role is really where people have started calling me like the team manager or athlete manager for sure. With my last role, sports marketing manager, it was basically sponsored races, Salomon sponsored races in North America, so Canada and US. And then athletes. And then with my new role, I'm just they're not backfilling my other role. So I'm just going to keep working with athletes and races and then take on the sports or the trail run marketing strategy for North America. So I'll be working like with media and like our partnerships and clubs and just the broader like marketing for trail running for Salomon in North America. And then I won't be going to as many races. I won't be like as in the weeds, but yeah, I get to work with the athletes still, which is exciting because that's probably my favorite part.
That's super cool. And you mentioned strategy in North America for Salomon trail running, and I'd love to talk about that too. But First, I'm curious how you broke into the outdoor industry and how you started working with Salomon, because there's a lot of listeners that are trying to chart their own similar course. So I think they'd be interested.
Yeah, I always feel like this is a disappointing answer because it's not what most people probably want to hear. I used to do massage therapy for the runners up at the college here, like just sort of once a week. And then I worked at a spa, and then I worked at a coffee shop. Like I was just struggling in my 20s. And there was a couple of guys from Salomon that would come into my coffee shop every day, and just we'd like shoot the shit. And like we would just hang out and drink coffee. And then one of them was like, "You should come work for us." And I was like, "Okay, let me know, whatever." And then they told me there was a position open for just like a seasonal part-time customer service thing. And I was sort of doing seasonal work. Like I would try to ski as much as I could. And then in the summer, I skydive quite a bit. So I would like skydive in the summer, ski and snowboard all winter, and just like pivot back and forth between jobs that would allow that. So then I was like, oh, seasonal work's perfect. But then within like a couple weeks, they asked me if I wanted to stay on full time. So back then I did customer service for like Salomon, Suunto, Arc'teryx, Mavic, a bunch of like, there's a bunch of different brands under the Amer Sports umbrella. So I kind of had to be an expert at like all of these things, but then we went into a more siloed like approach, and I stayed with Salomon. And so I've been with Salomon now for 10 years, which is nuts. It was just last month was my 10-year anniversary. And from there, it's just basically been like from the day I started, I told the trail run marketing manager guy, not the day, but like, within the first year, I was like, I'm going to have your job someday. And then just sort of like worked my way into it, like showed up on weekends to help at races, and anytime like athletes were in town. You could probably like call it brown nosing or fangirling, but just like wanting to be involved any way I could. And then when positions would be created or like be available, I kind of just got my way in there. So it's not really like I have any like specialized training or did anything special. I just sort of worked really hard, was passionate, enthusiastic, and was in the right place at the right time.
It's an interesting story though, and I think there's a lot to be said about even just being physically very close to Salomon headquarters, and that you can find a way to serendipitously meet the right people and get in. And it's cool that you've been there 10 years too. So, is this the place you plan to be? Like this is like you're fully invested?
I'm fully invested. Yeah, because I was living in Salt Lake before, and we're based in Ogden, Utah. So I made a little bit of a move. I never thought I'd live in Ogden, but I like it a lot. Bought a house up here, and then a couple of years later bought another one. So I think I'm like fully invested in Ogden at least, but definitely can't really see myself working for another, like definitely not another footwear brand in the industry. Like I could not ever. I just love Salomon so much. So it'd be like I was a wilderness guide before, and I like doing stuff like that, but maybe I would just like quit one day, sell all my things, and like own a coffee shop or something. I don't know. Like I don't see what I would do outside of this, which is probably like a dumb idea to not have like a plan if things go awry, but I'm kind of all in.
That's super cool. Well, I want to talk about your current role because I know that it can be defined differently based on the brand. So when you're managing the trail team, and you've mentioned that there's other responsibilities from other positions that didn't get backfilled that you're still retaining. Yeah, what does it mean at Salomon to manage the trail team? Can you talk about what like your day-to-day, like a typical day like right now looks like when you're not on the road traveling?
Yeah, unfortunately it's changed a little bit from when I was first in this role because we were in the pandemic, and I got to have like Zoom calls every week or every other week with the whole athlete team, and I would make them like answer dumb questions about themselves. We would do like icebreakers. I've built like a Spotify playlist off of all their favorite songs. And we were just so super connected before, but we don't really get to talk as much. So as far as my like relationship with the athletes right now is like, just paying their bonuses and reimbursing them for like race entries and stuff like that. So they submit all of their invoices to me, and we'll chat every once in a while and just see like how their season's going, how our race went, if they need product or gear. If I've sent them like specific gear that I want to hear how they if they liked it, if it's something new for us. Like we just came out with the plated trail shoe, and there's a couple athletes that have been running in it that I'm super curious, like what they think specifically. So I'll just chat with them about that. So it's nothing like too formal this time of year. It's just sort of like keeping in touch and checking in, seeing how things are going. But around October is when we'll start like negotiating 2023 contracts. So things get a little more heated then, a little more serious.
Cool. Well, I think one thing I'm curious about, maybe we can just transition here to what it means to be a Salomon Trail team member and how the team is constructed, stuff like that. The first question I have, what does Salomon do to create a team atmosphere for its athletes? Because I know that, at least in our sport, we're not at a point quite yet where, like on the roads and track, you have these co-located teams, everyone showing up to the same space with a coach and practicing and traveling to races together. In our world, at least, it's still more remote, more virtual. So I'm just curious about how Salomon conceptualizes that experience and what it looks like.
Yeah, I think it was the first year I was in like more of this type of role. We did an athlete summit here in Ogden, and we brought the team in and we went through some like product training, did a lot of like running together. One of our ambassadors at the time was like a chef at like a Michelin restaurant or whatever in like the Big Sur area. So he flew in a bunch of food and cooked dinner for all of us. And we just like got a bunch of these like condos up in the mountains and hung out. And we didn't really have an agenda other than just like getting to know each other and like learning a little bit about the new product coming out. And so we just try to get together once in a while like that. That was a little hard to like align with a lot of people's schedules. And I've sort of learned if you bonus a race and it's a really cool race, you can get a lot of your athletes there and then we can just sort of do it there. So the last 2 years we've gotten like either 2 or 3 really big Airbnbs in Tahoe for Broken Arrow and just really like incentivize people to race and then just invite athletes to come hang out. And we all do like a family dinner. But I think just getting together and like keeping communication going. When the pandemic was full on, we would have our team calls and they'd be video and we'd all just kind of like talk about nothing really important, but just like connecting as much as you can. Every time we get together for a race, I get at least one text that's like, oh my gosh, it was so good to see everyone. I feel like we're a family. So just creating those moments where we can all get together, because that life's just so busy. And like, if we see each other at a race and we're not all staying in the same place, it's like, good luck. You're never going to see everyone. But I like, if you have a cool house to stay out with everyone else, I think that's really cool. But there's really nothing else. You'll get into this probably later, but like when we kind of pick our athletes, a lot of it goes into like their character. And I think it's a lot of just them. Like you put them in a place and they're all just so interesting and so nice. And like, they just connect with each other and end up feeling like a family.
No, I think that's a great next topic to cover here. I mean, I guess I can just ask it pretty straightforwardly. What do you look for when you're bringing on a new athlete into Salomon? You mentioned that like character has stuff to do with it, but when it's all virtual, I'm wondering like how you make those judgments and how you like discover athletes, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. I will say, like when I first took over, there was a lot of athletes on the team that are still on the team now, and there's a lot that aren't. And it was just kind of like things change. Like I think at one point they had to have, maybe it was like 4 years ago, it was like they have to have this many like Facebook followers or like Instagram followers or something, and like the criteria has like shifted. And now for 2022, anyone that came in on like a 1 year or a new contract last year, I just basically took social media out of it. And we have like an influencer team that's like in their communities, either online or in person. And those are influencers. And then these are athletes. And maybe like 4 times a year, I'll ask them to post or something, but I don't really look at social media unless there's like, okay, I'm looking for a male who, races the shorter distance, who's competitive, like who's like podium all the time. And if it came down to like 2 guys, then you could start to be like, okay, which one is like involved with the retailers in his area that could help with our brand? Like if our premium retailers are in that area and he has a good relationship with them, maybe that one makes the most sense. Or maybe they have 25,000 followers and the other one doesn't have social media, you know, and it's like something that could like tick someone onto the other side, but it's definitely not like a top criteria anymore. But I was definitely earlier thinking just like, other than that, like I look at like consistency in the sport, like getting injured is just too easy. And when I look at athletes who maybe they haven't been winning for a really long time, or they haven't been super competitive, but they've been in the sport, they've consistently like improved. That's really interesting to me. And then their character for sure. And just the way that they like embody the culture of trail running, whether they do or don't. And then ultimately, like I have to talk to these guys like every day sometimes. And so just, they have to be nice. Like I always just tell them they have 2 jobs and it's to run fast and be nice. Cause I'm like, I just want to make sure you're out there being nice to new runners, being nice to just, if you're on a training run, and just having like that trail etiquette, or inviting people out on the trails, getting more people out, and having that kind of like character and personality that goes a long way. But then there's more tangible things. Like I always look at the ITRA. Is it International Trail Running Association points?
Yeah.
And ultra sign up. And, you know, every once in a while you'll get a resume that's like, I got first at this race, first at this race, first at this race. And you look and you're like, that 5K is different than this 5K. Yeah. And like, or you might have won that 50K and that's freaking sweet, but like, it wasn't like the 52K at Broken Arrow, or, you know, something really competitive. So it's hard because, you know, you are an elite athlete in your own right. But just sometimes being picky, it's hard for me too, because I'm like not at that level. So it feels really bratty to be like, but last couple of years I've made like tiers within our team. So it's like those people that like live and breathe running and they're competitive and they're just like pushing. Obviously that's like going to be more of our elite team. And then we have like a pro team who either maybe they're like coming up, or they're just sort of consistently winning national races. They don't really have an interest in racing international, but that's like where we have a lot of our team. And then we have like a community team that's super involved in their community. They're partnering up with retailers, doing group runs. They're still like winning races. They're getting on the podium at their local races. You know, everyone likes them. And then we have online influencers, and we have people like Lauren Fleshman and Ricky Gates, and like people who are kind of more like project based that we call our inspiration team.
I want to talk about that inspiration team in a second, because that's super interesting.
Very
but
cool.
One thing I want to go back to, because it's just fascinating to me. You said that the criteria has shifted in recent years, and you've actually almost entirely removed social media obligations from the sponsored athletes' to-do list. And I'm curious why, because I think, you know, that's probably a staple, if I had to imagine, in most contracts in other brands. So yeah, what went into that calculus?
I feel like this is crazy, but I kind of feel like I was accidentally one of like the first influencers. like I went on this weird all women's trip down to Havasupai, if you're familiar, the like waterfalls and stuff. And I had maybe like 4,000 followers at the time, and that was like a ton. I only have like 10 now, but I kind of weed them, or I have like 9, but I'll like weed people out sometimes. But I went with all these girls that were just like taking pictures of themselves in hammocks in front of the waterfall. And that sounds really normal now, but back then I was like, what are we doing? Like, I thought we were going to swim, or I thought we were going to like hang out and party, but everyone was just like trying to get these like sweet shots of them in the outdoors. And then we went on some hikes and they did the same thing. And it was so strange to me. And I got home and I remember being like, that was so weird. Although those girls just like were trying to get pics for their Instagram. And that, I can't remember how old I was, man. It was like more than 10 years ago. So, I think there was a time when like peer-to-peer reviews and suggestions and recommendations really hit hard, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I think we can all kind of see through influencers and certain people who are saying things they're supposed to say, or saying things they've been coached to say, or saying things because they get product for free or they're getting paid. And I just don't think it's genuine. And if someone's running for us, running for Salomon, I hope they're just talking about us like genuinely and sincerely. Like if they post like I hope they tag us. That would be a bare minimum. I do ask that they put it like in their bio that they're a Salomon running athlete. But I think more than anything, it's like, I want them to, if they have a relationship with social media that they like, I don't want to like muddy that up. And if they hate social media, I don't want to force them to post, because I've seen that from some sponsored athletes like that I follow, and it's really funny and it's awkward. And they'll sometimes be like, brand X said I had to post something about these shoes. They're sweet, and you're like, oh, that's so weird. Like, I would hate if one of our athletes did that. So I just kind of looked at it and thought that right now it's not important. And I think the conversations I was hearing about, like, okay, I'm an athlete, but you won't sign me because I don't have 10,000 followers. Like, what's the deal? Am I an athlete or am I an influencer? I just wanted to really clear that up and be like, we're signing you because you're fast and like you're cool and your character's awesome and you're consistent and you're like this important person in the sport for sure. But that's just a benefit of that, or like a bonus.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was like a strong move right now, because I don't think social media is as impactful as it used to be. I think storytelling is really cool on social media and like reliving experiences or being live in an experience and things like that. But I just don't think like that phony, like peer-to-peer, like suggestion thing is a thing anymore. I don't know.
Well, no, I think it's super interesting, and it makes me think, because it's so hard to track, but I think word of mouth marketing in our community is incredibly powerful. I think to people just in the Salt Lake area, I think of like Jimmy Elam, who works for Ultra, Leah Yingling, who's on the Salomon team. There's so many people that I'll have conversations with on runs, and whether I realize it or not, they're influencing me, and I ultimately go and invest in the products they're using. But you can't track that stuff. You can't track a text message conversation. You can't track what was said on a 90-minute run, or what was said in passing at like a dinner among 10 trail running friends. And I think that these runners, even if it doesn't somehow show obviously on Instagram, there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes for these brands that I think is super impactful. And but yeah, it's like that dark area of marketing that you can't really prove with numbers that's working. So I don't know.
Sometimes it's really hard to show or like explain what I do in certain areas of my job for sure, because it isn't like super tangible. And that's another like criteria that I look at is like, I don't think I've ever found someone who's like head to toe in love with another brand and like brought them over to Salomon. It's more like people who are already loving Salomon and have run in it and like our ethos or like our brand and like our products and like our team vibe, and I get a lot of like Instagram messages or even emails that are just saying like, I got to hang out with your team at some race and it was so fun. Like that's like, seems like the most fun team to be on. And like, when people approach joining our team that they're already kind of like an advocate for the brand, or they're just already, it's like, I don't want to have to convince them that like, this is the shoe they should be wearing, or these are the hydration vests you're going to like have to love or whatever. It's just so much easier to work with someone who already loves Salomon, and there's plenty of people out there. So yeah. And then without knowing it, they're like out and people are looking at what they're wearing and what they're doing. And I just think that that's more impactful than if I was like, hey, Leah, you need to post that this is your new favorite shoe, because it drops tomorrow. But we do ask them to do reviews on Salomon.com. So I'm not going to be totally like, we don't ask them to do anything, but it says that they're like a sponsored athlete with us. So like take their advice lightly or whatever, or like take it very seriously because they're putting it through the paces. But yeah, I have to like reassess the strategy every year. Yeah. And like around this time, you can start to see like, oh, that was a mistake, or that was a cool thing we did, or whatever, because they start to kind of, I don't know, show themselves the way that these choices you make.
I think we're seeing a really interesting rise in community affiliation too. Like when we both know in the Wasatch, the women of the Wasatch group, that's like 900 people, and you can always count on at least 20 to 30 to 40 people showing up at any of their Tuesday night group runs. And
Bonkers.
those are, or more, and there's those are excellent opportunities for very organic conversations in addition to all the other positives that those groups serve. So I think that kind of affiliation is interesting to measure as well.
Yeah, even groups like that kind of pop up, and then like, just we're going to speak super locally, but like Wasatch Mountain Wranglers was like the rage when I was out in the field doing group runs. Like if I could partner with them and like Salt Lake City Running Company, I was like, yes, big win.
Yeah.
And now that's just like kind of dissipated. And now it's like Women of the Wasatch is on fire. I'm trying to set up a beer mile with them.
Nice.
Like just doing fun stuff with them is, like just fun because they're really fun and inclusive, but also like, if they're liking Salomon, then that's awesome too. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool community groups out there, and you just have to like connect with them in a more like unique and like genuine way than just like social media influencers. I don't know.
I had a couple more questions on the athlete front. I think, again, I'm not a pro athlete, but I talk and hang out with a couple of them. And I think one of the biggest concerns among that group of runners in our community is if they sign a contract with a brand, it could be Hoka, it could be Salomon, it could be Adidas, you name it, that it's just this very precarious relationship because we participate in a risky sport. Like injury risk is high. It can oftentimes be the exception to the rule that people have more than one good race a year. I'm curious how Salomon thinks about that, and what expectations are set with athletes when they're signing contracts. Like, is it pretty volatile, or do you say, hey, we're going to believe in you for the long term and stuff like that?
It's really funny. I was going to mention this earlier, but I was at Marathon. I had Olivia Amber from the North Face and Allie Mack from On, and myself staying in a house. And I was just kind of talking to them about their contracts. And like, they're not sharing that much with me, which is what they're supposed to do. But I was like, how cool would that be if I could sit down with like Esther from the North Face and I forgot his name from On, Andy Bryan.
David Kilgore. Does he also help manage the team?
That's who it is. Andy Bryan, David Kilgore. And just be like, okay, how much can we share with each other? Because I kind of feel like every year I get the like global strategy from our French team, because we're a French brand. We're a European brand, so I get their strategy, but it doesn't always make sense for our market. So I tweak it a little bit. And then some of it, I'm just like flying by the seat of my pants. Like, I think this is what's happening in the US market, and I'm going to take this risk. But I forgot your question. What was your question?
Well, I was just going to say, how do you quell the fears of athletes that are coming on board to Salomon that think, yeah, it's great that I just got signed by you, but this is a risky sport. Injury risk, even if I have a track record of healthiness, is high. And I'm just going to be a one-hit wonder, and you're going to drop me the very next year.
Well, okay, so that's where I was getting at with this, is that like we can do like a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year contract, and it's obviously like better for us if we do 1 year because we can really be agile and like adaptable. But I know that doesn't give anyone, peace of mind. So we try to sign people 3 years when we can and give them that a little bit. And I started including, like just really like incentivizing things. But then I check in with some of our athletes just to like quite a bit, just to make sure like they don't feel too much pressure. I just this year added like I think it's a 90-day, basically that they have to do 3 races a year, which I think seems fair. And they're not like dictated or whatever. Like, I don't say you have to do these 3 races a year, but you have to do 3 races a year, just so that you're still active and relevant. And at least, even if you're like not winning it, like go out to your community race and like get involved with the community. Even if you're injured, don't race, obviously, but even when people have been injured, just keeping them involved and like with, whether that's online or with the retailer or with our community runs, but really just trying to give them a peace of mind that like, you're not just here because you're fast. We also like who you are. A lot of our athletes have like side projects and these like dreams that we want to help them, manifest. That it's like, whether it's, Nolan's 14 or some FKT or first attempt at something that they want to do, like if we can support those things, or when a lot of them, I don't know, it's just like I try to instill like just being like, you're not just here because you run.
Yeah.
You're here for more reasons than that and that. And then also, if we sign someone for 2022, let's say, and they get injured, like we've never not paid them. So we'll still pay for that year. And if, you know, we need, like, there's been athletes that have stepped down because they've gotten injured and they're even signed for multiple years. And that's really impressive. But I think just really like if there's athletes like listening to this and it's like, you're going to go have a conversation with like an athlete manager, if that's something that makes them nervous, like if you voice that during your conversations. I have a lot of conversations with the athletes I sign just because we just don't have like a huge team. I don't want to make a bad decision and just, you know, maybe be stuck with someone who's like not nice or not. I don't know. I'm stumbling a little bit.
Oh,
sorry.
No, this makes total sense.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of parts to it where it's like, if it's something that worries you, definitely bring it up, and then thinking of ways to work around it. And then as soon as like our athletes have gotten injured, like before I even know they're injured, they'll come to me and be like, okay, here's what's going on. This is how long my doctor says I'm out. Like, are there any races I could come to and either be on like a panel or like come serve drinks or, you know, just be on site and help out or hang out or whatever. And they want to very much stay relevant and stay front of mind, and they still want to be part of the team and they want to be involved. So that's really cool. And like, I don't know of any brand that wouldn't like fulfill their side of the contract when something comes up.
Yeah, no, this is good. Where do I want to go with this? Well, I think one thing that would be helpful to the audience, because I think there are a fair number of aspiring sponsored / pro athletes in the audience. And maybe I'll ask you this, like, are there any questions that you're surprised aren't asked more often in the negotiation process that you think would be helping athletes? Like, maybe they're not asking the questions because they want to, but they're afraid that like it's gonna, you know, shut down opportunities and stuff like that. Like I think you just made a good example with just being upfront about like injury risk and expectations over the course of the contract.
Yeah, I have to think about that. But I do, like with women, especially, I've had a couple women come to me and we're kind of negotiating contracts in October, and maybe they're already signed for a couple of years and they're like panicked because they got pregnant and they don't know what that means, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I'm just shocked at how nervous some athletes are to ask questions that seem like just not like a no-brainer, but it's like, oh, I would have never thought to just like drop you because this happened, or, you know, we're not going to like just walk away from our commitment to you because you have to take 6 months off or something, you know? But I think understanding, it's like reading it through and really understanding it, because there are some parts in ours, like we have to work with a lawyer and get it, you know, legal and make sure everything makes sense and it's fair and right. And then there's times where I'll have a conversation with an athlete months later and they're like, I don't understand why I have to do this. And you're like, it's in your contract, you know? Yeah. So just really reading through, I would say some people I've worked with in the past, it's like, they're so passionate about their side projects that we kind of like, they want to like muddy the water and be like, with my athlete contract, can you provide, you know, this and that for this project I'm doing that's like, maybe it's like a film festival or something that's not, it's like, could be in with it, but it's like separate. So I think if you have these passion projects, having an addendum or like having a separate contract that spells out like, this is this and this is that, and being as clear as you can in like the give get for everything. I've learned to just be very detailed and very like clear on those give gets. Like, we give you this, you give us this, you know, like this is this kind of relationship. And reading through like why things can be terminated and asking questions about what those things mean, because it can be tricky, and just really understanding like some of it is vague and some of it is very wordy in ours. And I've tried to simplify it as much as I can, but I'll admit, like, I'm reading through it and I'm like, I don't fully understand what this is getting at. So I'm just going to have the lawyer explain it to me, reword it, and have him like approve it because it doesn't fully make sense. So I don't think any brand is like trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, but it's like some lawyer helping you write it and they're like using words that we don't use in day to day. So I think things like that and just understanding like maybe what your brand's like goals are, or like your like what your our focus right now is definitely like short distance competitive like fast races locally here in North America. I know we have a couple people on the team that don't like necessarily fit right into that, like Mike McKnight and Courtney DeWalter and people who are running these long distances, and that's a separate thing. But I think it's really exciting when someone can do more than one good race a year, you know, and it's because they're doing like 26Ks. So understanding, like being really clear, like my favorite distance to race is a 50 miler. Is that like aligned with what your goals are as a brand, you know, and just like things like that, like being really clear about what your ideal partnership looks like and what you're hoping to get out of it so that you're not like a mismatch. I don't know.
Another thing I'm curious about, switching gears just a little bit, you mentioned earlier that within your sponsorship model, you have tiers of athletes. So you have like the global athletes, then you have like the pro athletes. And I'm curious, how do you go about competing for / recruiting athletes like the Courtneys of the world, the Eli Hemmings of the world? What is the sell on like choosing Salomon versus Hoka or Adidas or like some other brand?
You know, I've never like chased down an athlete. We started working with Courtney years ago. She came to our run clubs in Colorado, and I think we started by just giving her like 6 pairs of shoes a year. And then the next year we gave her like $2,000, like here's $2,000 for your gas money or whatever. And then it just like escalated very quickly from there. And then hopefully she'll be with us for the rest of her career, you know, and it's just like you build those relationships. And then, you know, if I feel like, let's say I was at Broken Arrow and the guy who came in second was Eli Hemming, but he was wearing full like Under Armour or something. I wouldn't go up to him and be like, you should come run for Salomon. But the fact that he's wearing full Salomon, and our team the night before at dinner was like, do you know what, Eli Hemming? He's so rad. He's so nice. He's such a good guy. And they're all like, you should totally talk to him, you know? And so I Instagram messaged him the night before and was like, hey, everyone said I should talk to you. Do you want to meet me up at the tent at like 11? So I think it's more like I've never approached an athlete and had to like convince them to come run for us. And if I get to that negotiation point in the conversations where they're like, okay, well, I'm talking to like 3 other brands and they're going to pay me this much or blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, well, you should go with them then. Like if you're after money, and just money, and like maybe you'll change brands in 2 years, or like you're just sort of following wherever the cash flow goes. I don't know if that's the right move for us. Everyone who's on our team is just sort of like really wants to be on the Salomon team. And there's been instances where I'm like embarrassed at what we're coming in at first. And then you see their performances and you're like, wow, we need to talk about next year because we came in way low and I'm embarrassed at what we're paying you right now or whatever. So, I've been shocked at how little they're willing to take because they just like love the people on our team and love being on the brand, like love being in the team. So I think there's nothing I'm ever going to say like, you know, you should run for Salomon because of this, because like certain shoes aren't for everybody. Like you find your shoe that works for you. And like a lot of the time that sways that. Like I have someone I really, really, really like, and she really, really, really likes us and our team, but our shoes just don't work for her. And so we hang out all the time, we run together, but she just can't run in our shoes, you know, and we can't have her as an athlete. But then there's just, I don't think that that's a conversation that I would be willing to have where I'm like used car salesman for the brand.
Yeah.
So it makes it easy because I'd say I get at least one message a day on Instagram about how someone either wants to be an athlete for our brand, an ambassador for our brand, or they want my job. And so there's no like shortage of athletes out there that I know are, qualified to be a sponsored athlete, but
Right on.
it's sort of like easier if they already like Salomon.
Well, another question I have for you, because you mentioned this project-based inspiration team. I'm always curious what happens to athletes when they're either ready to retire from formal competition or just phase into the next step in their career, like Scott Jurek with Brooks comes to mind. And you mentioned Ricky Gates and Lauren Fleshman, and to my knowledge, like Ricky and Lauren both incredible success at various stages in their career in our sport, and on the road and track. What does it mean to be a part of this inspiration team? You talk about this because I've never heard of this before.
I know. I'm like, oh no, I let the cat out of the bag with the name. No, just kidding. I think I was realizing I feel like we're one of the only, maybe I'm just like tunnel vision because I've worked here for so long, but I don't see a lot of brands who like keep their athletes on just because they're interesting and like do cool things. No, but we do have some contracts that are very project based. So whether they come to us ahead of time and say, next year I want to do like these two things, I think I would need like this much money and this is what I would look for support. Or if it's just like, we like what you're doing already, we know you'll come up with something great, like let's work together. But like Ricky does Bus Run Bus and Hut Run Hut, and we kind of like low key support those. It's not like a big sponsorship or anything, but we give him gear for those things. And he did like some backpacking, fast packing trips this year. He also did like his ultra training thing he took like the Amtrak train, and it was like a CLE Amtrak Salomon project.
Oh, nice.
But there's certain people that are just great people, great storytellers. And you're like, we just want you around. Like we want you to stay with the brand. Like Ricky Gates to me, like before I worked here and before I knew him, it was just like, he is just Salomon, So when you find people like that, you just want to hold on to them, and they always bring something interesting. And like, I learn a lot from him and Lauren. They're just very like articulate and they tell good stories, and I just talk in circles, and I like, I aspire to be, a great storyteller like them someday. But it's really cool to have those different types of people who inspire you on the team and that have so much different like experience within the sport, like years ago when Ricky was racing at Speed Goat or something, like the whole scene was different then.
Oh yeah.
And like the whole sport and all of it was so different. So to just get to be around him and like hear stories is just really cool. But we don't have a ton of those athletes, and some of them kind of teeter back and forth. I think Max King is just basically on all of our teams. He's just like, just keeps getting better with age. So we definitely think of him as like an inspirational athlete because he's like leading these kids camps, and he just is so involved in his community. But then he just won Mount Marathon, and he's just like crushing. So some do kind of tiptoe back and forth on some of those lines, but
yeah,
it's just like, it's cool if one of our athletes on the team now said he wants to be the next Max King, and he just wants to be like so involved in the sport that he's not just like thinking about running. He's thinking about like the big picture and like the legacy he wants to leave on the sport, So I just think stuff like that's cool.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, because let's just say that you spend the vast majority of your 20s and your 30s committing yourself to the performance side of the sport. But at the same time, you've been interacting with the brand on the marketing side for a super long time too, and probably picking up some skills there. Is there a way to neatly transition into that part of the company once your competition days are over? And this sounds like, if you've picked up storytelling skills along the way, or that just naturally suited you, that is one way to remain relevant, which I think is both awesome from like a stability, security standpoint, but also it's just great for the sport that person doesn't just disappear, but they stay around for a long time.
Yeah, I think of all the things that Ricky's done for the sport, and it's so fascinating. And like even Max right now, I'm like pushing hard for him to be the new like global international athlete team manager. I don't think he even wants to be it, but I think there's always really cool opportunities like that too. If he wanted to step away from, racing and putting on these camps and stuff like that, he could walk into the office like tomorrow and get a job with Salomon. Everyone loves him so much.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I just got a couple more questions for you. You mentioned that you've been with Salomon for about a decade now, and I'm guessing you've seen a lot of transformation within the company, but also within the sponsorship landscape as a whole. And I'm curious, have you noticed any big differences between, let's just say, 2012 and 2022 about like opportunities, for example, in the sport for athletes? Like, just to name one example, are there more athletes on the Salomon roster that have the chance to be full-time now, for example?
Yeah, I think I have a hard time with years. So I guess that's about when I started. And it was like around that time, it was like Dakota and
maybe Killian?
Ricky and like Max. What?
Killian?
Always Killian, yeah. And like Megan Kimmel and Stevie Kramer and Anna Frost. And it was like all of them were just like top tier. I don't remember us having like multiple tiers, but I also think, you wonder sometimes like how their times would stack up now because there's so many more trail runners. But we had a pretty tight but elite team. But I don't think like anyone was really getting paid. Like that's such a new thing. Like I think we used to cover expenses for races and travel and lodging a lot and give people gear. But I would say the biggest change I've seen is like paying someone an actual livable wage in the last 10 years, because trail running just hasn't been at that level. I think even if you think back, like I don't know how old you are, but if I think back to like my first ultra, I think of who was at the starting line, and it's like a bunch of like crotchety old men and like definitely just like an older crowd, and like I don't know. Times were slower, and then now it's like these like little whippersnappers and their split shorts. They're 22-year-olds, and that just like wasn't a thing 10 years ago. And I think it's now being seen. Well, we know this. I mean, I've talked about it a lot, but like we see it as just it's like the bigger brands from road running are going to start really coming into trail, and we can't get away with paying these like top trail athletes these like retainers probably anymore, because I do think, we've been like assessing our sports marketing strategy and realizing like we do need and want to pay more. And it's like just across the sport and across all the brands and industries and athletes, like it's increasing. We want to be right there too and feel like what we're paying is fair. But it probably means we'll have to like downsize the team back to when we had like just 10 elite athletes and they're all getting compensated fairly, instead of like kind of spreading it out really thin and having a bigger team. But that's for sure been the biggest thing I've noticed. Like, I remember just sending our athletes like a couple pairs of shoes every month, and that was like, that's your payment, like that's been a huge change. And I do hope that we can continue to pay a competitive rate. I don't think that's another thing is like I don't know how much other people are making, other athletes and what other brands are paying. And that's just like something that we don't talk about. But that would be so interesting to know.
It's interesting, if you talk to athletes, they'll say that they feel there's like a black box between them and the brand, but it's interesting there's a black box between brands as well. Like nobody in the market, I mean, maybe you have a decent sense, but you don't have any exact figures to benchmark against, and it's one big guessing game. That's super interesting.
Well, yeah, and we'll have an athlete that is totally content, and like my bad for not like realizing their potential sooner maybe, but they'll be running for us for race entries and footwear, and then another brand will come in when their contract is expiring and then offer them something, and I'm like, oh, and they'll tell me like, they offered me this much. Maybe I want to stay here, but can you like match that? And you're like, holy crap, like you just don't know like how they're structuring their team and like what's important to them. Like if maybe that person on our team didn't make a lot of sense because we're focused on the Golden Trail Series and they're focused on 100 milers or something like that. more so, then you're like, maybe that athlete just resonates so much with this brand for them that they want them that bad. And we love them so much, but I'm like, man, I think you should go to that team. That's a lot of money. And there's no transparency. There's no way to know. But then you can kind of see who some of the bigger brands are in the sport and assume like, you can kind of guess that, Jim Walmsley's being paid a lot, because it's Hoka. It's just like, things, but you don't know the specifics at all. And I try to get in there and use my charm and wit to figure things out, but it's a wall.
Would you say, in just ballparking it, guessing it, would you say that payment entered into the equation like 2 years ago or 5 years ago, like on that 10-year time horizon, where 10 years ago it was just shoes? Like, when do you think that switch flipped, if you had to guess?
I would say like probably 5 years ago, but then it sort of took a pause for the pandemic. Okay. Like that kind of got weird. And then all of a sudden it like really leveled up. Like maybe you were paying them a few grand or like 10 grand or something like that. But then I think in the last 2 years, I've really seen it like just skyrocket kind of.
As a fan of the sport that wants to see more people like invest their life's work here, especially as athletes, I shouldn't say just as athletes, as just anywhere in the sport, that's very exciting to me, that more people will have the opportunity to just exclusively focus on being a high performance athlete, and hopefully over multiple years too. Like I like the idea of those multi-year contracts so that they can, maybe 1 year they do have an injury, but like they still got 2 years left and they can focus. I don't know. So this is a super exciting time. And it just proves to me that our sport is on this awesome growth trajectory if brands have the ability to pay as well.
Yeah, I think we've all sort of like, especially when you talk to race directors, like they really want to incorporate purses and like just getting top athletes to their races and just growing the whole sport and community overall is, I think, really front of mind for a lot of people. And then as, like the bigger brands start to come into our sport, like, it's like when you have that competition, you got to like up your game in any realm. So it is really exciting. I especially love advocating for our female athletes who I feel like just maybe, women in the outdoor industry. I've worked in the outdoor industry for a long time, and I've had to figure out ways to have my voice heard and how to really like stand up for myself and advocate for myself. And it's hard. Like, so I especially just have the soft spot for like the women on our team and just like how I can help elevate them and advocate for them in the sport, because it's hard to like, I love when athletes come to me and be like, this is this thing I did. But it takes a lot of guts to brag about yourself, essentially. And there's a lot of struggles going on behind the scenes that we don't always see. And then there's just so much that goes into like the races and everything that's happening. And I'm just always impressed, and I'm always just trying to get what's fair and like what's right. And so even with me, like I have to manage our budget for North America for all of our athletes. And so just making really smart choices and making sure that those people who have been with us and have been consistent and have been just like awesome pieces of the brand are taken care of before I go like scouting out new athletes and bringing new people into the fold. Even if it would be really cool to get that person, it's like, are we taking care of our people to the level that we want first? And maybe that one has to slide. And we have to give that one up, because I would rather take that money and invest it back into people who have been like committed to us for so long. So it is challenging, and I have a tendency to be hyper like transparent, like too transparent and super honest. And I've been known to like give away the farm, when they're just like, oh, I just wanted 2 eggs. And I'm like, here, take it all. So I really have to like reel it in and like really see what they're looking for. And like, there's athletes that don't want to fully be like, I don't want to 100% be focused on running all the time. So our investment to them, it's like, if they're willing to do these 4 Golden Trail National Series races, but other than that, they want to be out like canyoneering or mountaineering or skiing or surfing or something, making that contract make sense for them too, that they can have that flexibility and not feel like they have to race all the time and train hard all the time.
Super cool. Well, I got one more question for you before we close out. You talked earlier about the strategy of Salomon in North America, focusing on faster, shorter races, which is interesting to me. Can you just talk more about that in particular, and then maybe what your investments in the trail running space in our neck of the woods looks like over the next couple of years, like what you're really focusing on and looking for?
Yeah, I think I don't remember who, but like I was talking to an athlete at a race a few years ago, and we were just talking about how trail running used to almost mean ultra running. Back when I started, I didn't really like, either they didn't really exist or I wasn't really noticing like trail half marathons and trail marathons. It was more like, come do a 50K, come do a 50 miler, come do a 100 miler. And then we started seeing like the shorter distances popping up, and like even the Cirque series, like that became like very fun and competitive and approachable too. So just sort of talking about a lot of things about short distance trail racing is really fun, and it's like easier to spectate, you know, because you don't have to pay attention for 20 hours. And like there are those bomb 100-miler and like 200-mile races that you're glued to, but getting to see some of your, like the athletes that you might love or like follow race 4 times a year really hard is really cool. So I think just from like that perspective, I sort of made that shift for 2022, and it seems like it went well, and it's been really fun to get involved. Golden Trail National Series was new for us 2021 and 2022, and this is the second year, and we've had Broken Arrow so far in QMT up in Quebec, and then September we'll have 3 races and the final at Flag. But it's getting a lot more traction. Like a lot of people, I just kind of went rogue and built like a sign up sheet to see like who was racing it, because the only other way I can do it is kind of almost do like a V lookup across all the races and see if there's repeating people in it. So Ultra Sign Up helped me build like a page where I can track results. Cool. And there are like a lot of people interested in it, and a lot more than there were in 21. And I think just the races that we've picked are really top notch, and they're like, the whole vibe is right, and it's like these fun like festival feelings kind of. But yeah, I just think that if you're looking for that kind of like, I don't know, playful, competitive racing, is that like 26K distance is super cool. Yeah. We definitely still are like a big mountain running brand, and like, you know, we'll have a bunch of athletes at Hard Rock next weekend, and we'll always have athletes at Western States and things like that. But as far as just like our main focus, we have a lot more athletes that race under 50K. And I think, I don't know, it was just sort of like one of those things that I just sort of made that call to invest in that like distance and that athlete, because we had to cut our budget back a lot when COVID hit. We used to sponsor like 230 races across the US, and it was like every little community race we could like get involved with, and it was so fun. We'd bring our demo shoes out, and we would just, you know, bring everyone beer, and it was so fun. But then we had like severe cuts, and we just were like, okay, we've got these like multi-year contracts with some of these races, so let's just go in as big as we can at these ones. And then I thought the best way to elevate, if you can only do 3 races, like the best way to get all of them elevated in exposure is to put it in a series. So Golden Trail Series made sense. And then in order to do the like 4 races you have to do to go to the championships, like they have to be shorter distance. So it kind of all just came together after the pandemic, and then going to the races, I was like, yes, this is a good thing. Like these distance of races are a lot more approachable. We see a lot more fasties out there, and it's fun to watch, and it's just kind of fun and cool. But I don't know, it just changes every year. Like 2 years ago we sponsored, or like 3 years ago, I don't remember how many years, we sponsored all the 200-miler
I remember
races,
that.
you know?
Well, I think it's cool.
So
I
it's
think
like,
it's directionally correct. I I have to admit, I am definitely an offender when it comes to equating trail running to ultra running. Just because I think like 100K, 100 mile, 200 miles, where all of my imagination and passion lies. That said, if I had to tell you my why for this podcast and why I do this stuff, it's just to purely get more people into trail running. And I fully agree with you that the gateway for that is definitely like in the VKs and the sub marathon distances and at places like Broken Arrow and honestly at all these different events that Salomon is sponsoring in the North American series. So I think it's a great strategy, and I'll be super curious to see, like if you measure these numbers, new entrants into the sport, like documented new entrants into the sport through those series, and if they're doing it because, like they just see a 10K as something that they can more easily wrap their head around and have fun at, and who knows and who cares if they move up the ladder in distance, because I think it's just good to have people on the trails regardless.
Yeah, we all had that one really cool trail experience, that got us into more cool trail experiences. So it's like, that doesn't happen on your, you don't get to like your first 50 miler by not having some kind of short distance fun time. Yeah. And then you mentioned like things you could see here, like in Salt Lake. Is that kind of what you mean? Like in Utah?
Across the board. But yeah, obviously would love to invest as much as I'm actually, there are races like Speed Goat and that whole series, but a part of me thinks there's still a lot of stuff to either build up or further invest in here. Like you mentioned how you equate the Wasatch 100 with Western States, and I love hearing that because even though that race still sells out every single year, I think there's so many more stories we could tell about it, so much more marketing and promotion we could do around it, and I would love to see some evolution there. And I'm only speaking for myself as a fan.
If you grew up in California, you're just so used to saying Western States. But I think here, like I've always thought about the Bear and Wasatch. So then anytime I go to say Western, I feel like I always say Wasatch because it's like the big 100 that's important to me, that's in my backyard. Yeah. But then there's a lot of runners that they have that like emotional connection to Western States. But yeah, I just think I like just kind of going out. Like I've been going to a ton of races this year and just sort of seeing what the overall vibe is. And I just like to feel kind of that I can be reactive and agile. And I have this really cool team at work that we're just all super passionate about trail running. I'm always like asking Max King questions, soundboard, like bouncing things off of him. Is this dumb? Is this cool? Is this a bad idea? So he's helpful there, but it's like, I don't know where the future of trail running is going. I like to speculate, but for a while there, I thought races were out and like FKTs are in, like Mountain Point to points are in. And then as soon as I went to the first race post-COVID, I was like, races are back on. I'm all about races. They're so fun. But then I was just talking to one of our like ambassador athletes, Chris Fisher, who he has like the vert record. Yeah. Do you hear him? Yeah. He's crazy. But he's going to try something funky out here in the Wasatch pretty soon. And I was like, oh yeah. So I think there's just going to be like little subcultures within the sport, that are just going to just grow and be so interesting. And it's so cool to be like where I came from. My first race ever was a 50 miler, and I was wearing no socks and I was wearing Nike Free road shoes and I didn't have a watch and I was using Map My Run and I just like gave it hell. And now to look at how the sport has changed, it's just like, it's so cool that I'm old enough that I've got to see all of that happen and then I get to see what comes next. But, I hope being based in Utah and just like having these mountains and having so much going on in the trail space, I want to like really get involved and invest more just here locally too. And I'm trying to think of fun ways to do that. But
well, Steff, it has been an honor to have you on the show. This has to date been a unique perspective on the podcast. We've mostly focused, as I've said, on coaches and athletes, and we've done some people in business, but this is our first athlete trail manager focused episode. So thank you for shedding all the light on it. I think you're going to give a lot of listeners great things to think about. And I'll make sure to link to all of your social media in the show notes. And go ahead.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I was thinking earlier, like for people who are, I know there are people interested in like getting into the outdoor industry. And I would say that more than knowing things about the sport, I just like love connecting with people. And you can see I have a lot of like anxious energy and I talk a lot. And I sometimes like I'm going to get off this podcast and be like, what did I even say? Like, I should just be quiet. But I think, you know, if that's something that you're interested in is like working with athletes and race directors, then a really important part of it is just like wanting to connect with those people. You can always learn about the thing that you're managing, like as far as like a race or a sport, things like that are like you can learn. But I think the best part about my job and working with Salomon is like the connections I've made with athletes and with race directors and people at work. And so just having this weird, obnoxious, like anxious energy has got me into places where I want to talk to the athletes all the time. I want to like figure out what like their dreams are and like, can I help them, you know, get to that? And if I can't, can I help them get somewhere else that can, you know, and just really wanting what's best for the people that I care about and like the athletes on our team and stuff. So I just think there's not really one way to get a job like this or to get a job in the industry. It's really just like being passionate about the sport and like being excited. I don't know. I always have to make it like just make people understand my weird jittery talk in circles energy, and it's just because I'm so excited about everything all the time.
Well, Steff, it's been a pleasure. I'm sure we'll talk again at some point, but thanks again for the time.
Okay, cool. I'll see you soon.